Hi, I'm Dazza Greenwood, and welcome to the FinTech Connect Flash Talk on identity and personal data as an asset class. So for all you folks out there in internet land, I'm going to say go ahead and use hashtag, we were told it was hashtag FinTech Connect, and I'll glance down to see if there's questions or something when we get to the discussion.
Can we record you?
Can you record? Yes, and this is being recorded too.
Oh, okay.
All righty. So here we go. Let's face it, our digital identity and personal data are important economic and practical resources. So let me break that down. Economic resource is probably what you're expecting, because I'm talking about this is an asset class. So, you know, folks are sure familiar with assets generally, and they come in two varieties. There's, you could say there's tangible and intangible property. Property is, and it's fundamentally legally what all assets are. Intangible property, I don't know why we don't really have very sharp taxonomies yet for dealing with it and all of its and all of the sophistication in which it presents, especially now in a digital economy. Like we know how to do customer lists, we know how to do software patents, we can do a few things under GAAP and IFRS, European accounting standards, a little bit more sophisticated. But in fact, we're behind in terms of how to conceptualize the economic object type of a digital asset, digital property. But it's not just about that. It's actually also a practical resource, which is so interesting. So I guess that's why it's an asset. It's identity and data are useful, practical tools and vehicles for expressing oneself and for interacting, for transacting, really increasingly for living in the digital age. So, you do our education through, you need to log in, almost all government transactions, healthcare, on and on and on. Our identities are how we interact, and that's increasingly digital. And then the data that we have, across our medical records, our banking data, our geolocation data from our phones, on and on and on. The email interactions online. We all know it's valuable, for marketing and for other purposes. Law enforcement comes up, epidemiology, being able to do early detection on outbreaks. It's remarkable what can happen, the value of what can happen, with productive use of personal data, and it's increasingly valuable. So that first sentence is our digital identity and personal data are important economic and practical resources. So here's why I want to say resource. I could have said asset. I could have said property. These are all important things to talk about, but I wanted to highlight the R word because I think it's worth thinking about. I think it's worth spotlighting that digitally, for the most part, these assets exist somewhere online that you can actually address and you can discover, you can access through a network. They are addressable, you could say. And so the simple way we always think about, that I always think about finding and clicking to, I'm gonna look at you because you're nodding really well. The way I think about this is I click on a URL and it takes me to the thing. Takes me to the movie, takes me to the white paper, takes me to the sign-up list, takes me to the information. So what is at the other end of that rainbow is it's a thing of value, and it's described as a resource because a URL is a uniform resource location or locator. And if you think about what a resource is, Peyton will appreciate this, I think, it's a nice way to think, like everything isn't considered a resource necessarily. I guess in theory, anything could be a resource, but it's something where it also covers natural resources. It covers resourcefulness. It covers a lot of things that aren't always in the shape of a physical, encapsulated, very definable piece of property. Resources can also be systemic as well as objects. Resource is a very nice word, and it really helps to capture what's unique and what I'd like to be what we are talking about now with respect to this new emerging asset class of digital property. Okay.
Yeah, another reason why it's a great word.
Could I ask you to hold it just for a second? And then actually, because I want to give you a ticket, all right? So your name, I think, was Andre. Oh, with an E, excuse me.
With an E.
So let me just fix that first of all. So Andre, you're number one. And then just give me like one word that encapsulates what you're going to say.
Yeah, it's about resource.
YR is like a good word, right? Okay. All right. So that's your ticket. Okay. So I don't forget, and you don't forget. We don't want to be cheated of that resource. Okay. So, but I do want to kind of plow through this and then get to general discussion. You're number one. And so I ended that with ever increasing value. And so exactly how valuable these things are right now, it's a little bit hard to say. You talk to valuation people and it comes up at time of bankruptcy if you're trying to sell something, but the precise worth and value and even the usefulness of these things is it's early days. And so this is still very dynamic, but whatever it is, I want to say it's important. It's of like discernible, cognizable value, and it's increasing. Like these are things I am certain that we can say. And that's why it is we're talking about it. Let's go a little further. Okay, ever increasing value. I regret having said that, like not perpetually ever, but it's increasingly. Okay, and now we go to the next thing and we're gonna dig in now. So personal identity involves more than money can buy. So I have to say that because we're not going to talk about this in a FinTech thing, but I just want you to note that unlike personal data, identity is also something that's essentially related to a human being. There's an ineffable quality of it that doesn't show up on any radar that's purely economic. So you could look at it spiritually, you can look at it politically, you can look at it socially, you can look at it any which way you want, but there's dimensions of it that are absolutely essential and that go beyond FinTech. And so when we look at solutions that'll work to ensure people have digital identities and tools and accounts and processes that operate correctly, that are that support and reflect digital identity and allow us to have it and do what we want to do or what we're supposed to do with it, to consent to things, to consent to be governed is part of what we do. Like some things that are very hard to quantify, but are very important and are at the bottom of our stack of our social compact. They're not all economic, but it is also part of an emerging asset class. So there's a very definable. Hey, come on in. This is the guy I was telling you about. Come on in. Hey, I've been talking about you. Welcome, Christian Smith, colleague, friend, and unindicted co-conspirator on a prototype that we've been cooking up that we're about to get to. So I'm really, really glad you're here. So I was just doing the Sandy Pentland Foundations of like a World Economic Forum data. Personal data is like the new oil. It's the oil of the new economy. That's it, and it's emerging asset class. Thriving industries exist to collect, track, and trade this information, while businesses and legal models respecting the rights and expectations of all stakeholders, including you as a consumer, but also as an investor and as an owner, as an operator in many roles, they have not evolved to keep pace. That's why we're having this talk right now. And so if there's very sophisticated ways, business models for ownership of real estate, very complete and well settled rules that, like Warren, for example, could talk about expertly for, say, property at bankruptcy. So like we know exactly how a lot of property is, like especially tangible assets, what's going to happen if you apply like the rules of secured creditors and other rules. It's fairly well settled. So there's always ambiguity at the edges. But by contrast, it's really early days when we look at this critical resource of our identity and our personal data and the worth of it. So in business models and industries, and really rely upon this access to this data to operate, and use of systems and services by which identity is expressed and used. And yet, I don't let me break the words down again. It's legal models with respect to the rights and expectations of all the stakeholders. So which legal models are there? Like, well, there's always, like, people think about copyright and they think about licenses. People think about privacy law. But in fact, really, like, a whole serious look at just basic property law, from the Magna Carta forward, like the first year of law school. Like, what happens when you lose it? Like, but there's pretty well settled rules for lost property and like how it, goes. What are the different property rights that you have to your personal data, and which ones could you get a collateral interest in, or which ones could you sell? Like, I can write a poem, which is one type of personal data. I could sell it if I want. I could rent it. I could destroy it. Is a core right. That's one of the ways you really know who owns something. Agency is another major one. Principal and agent. Like, who's the principal and who's the agent? Christian and I talk about this sometimes with respect to OpenID Connect and token systems, and now with blockchain identity. In general, one would think if it's your identity and you would use it to, consent to something, or to sign something, or to, just to be you, that you would be the principal, I would say, and that you could maybe ask other people to do things on your behalf. Like, would you notarize this for me? Or would you, perhaps you can delegate authority, that sort of thing. That would be an agency law. But the way in a lot of models, it's quite ambiguous. It's more like it's something that we're renting, or that we are leasing, or that we're being privileged on some ambiguous gift in return for advertising basis to utilize. So just agency law is a big one. And there's so many other fundamental laws. So the basic legal frameworks, and I would even say the roles and the relationships with respect to these things have yet to be defined. Now, so moving forward, let's get into the good stuff. So we've got some ambiguity, but meanwhile, the rise of smartphones, which is really key, smart homes and smart cities, among other things. But these are just, have to frame the talk somehow. So I wanted to just focus on those things that I think we can all get our heads around. They're, in a sense, they're kind of forcing the issue. And so they have catalyzed, and they're also accelerating questions of ownership and rights and obligations, but also just valuation. And they're giving us some context within which we can start to answer, I think, some of these questions. And in fact, we will have to. So now there's a sort of catalyst and accelerator upon the catalyst and accelerator of the web and mobile phones, and it is blockchain. And so while this is still a little bit over the horizon, it's not so speculative, so it's premature to talk about. And it's something that should be understood, because not only does it raise some of these questions, it also may provide the beginnings of ways to resolve them. So quick question, how many people here kind of know enough about what blockchain is so that you find yourself like explaining it sometimes to people? You have to raise your hand, Christian. Because I've seen it. Okay, that's like, and so, and how many people like, nope, that's not me. I don't explain blockchain to anyone. Okay, so most people have some sense of blockchain. So I won't go into it. Afterwards, let's talk about it. But I want to say frequently blockchain is, and a lot of the talks tonight are talking about cryptocurrency. Really important. I'm not talking about that. Something about the ledger that underlies and enables cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ether, and others, is independently very useful. It is itself a great resource that we could actually, that number one, it has identity. You get a blockchain wallet and it has a key pair, public-private key pair that you get. And you have an address, therefore, that you can be found at and that you can transact from. Handy stuff. More to the point, did you hear that word ledger? It's also, this blockchain, one way to look at it is it's a ledger. I would consider it maybe a log, but you know, it's an authoritative record of transactions. Oh, goody. Like, isn't that what we need up in here for digital assets? I think so. And furthermore, it can be a shared authoritative record. That's rare, maybe not in like a joint venture or in some tight, partnership or extended enterprise context or under a legal regime for a registry or something, land registry or, collateral registry, but a general shared ledger. Wow, I'm just thinking about all the days of like settlement and reconciliation at the end of the day, looking at everyone's books, all the coordination costs of just checking the ledgers of other partners and what happened that could, had we had a trustworthy, shared, authoritative, cryptographically awesome, publicly verifiable ledger. So with that in mind, let's go forward in the sentence. I keep losing my place. It's so small. The blockchain. Oh, smart contracts. I don't want to talk about that. And mass automation. Okay. I'll just finish the sentence. Offer new modes for control, methods for valuation, and mechanisms for exchange of key rights to these new asset types. Altogether, then we have the rise of smartphones, smart homes, and smart cities accelerated by blockchain, smart contracts, and mass automation offer new modes for control, methods for valuation, and mechanisms for exchange of key rights to this new asset type. I should probably say these new asset types because identity and personal data are kind of blend, but they're I think of them as different things. We can discuss that. So the reason I broke it down that way is one of the things I've noticed as I've been trying to get my hands around legal frameworks and workable economic and other models for ownership and just management fundamentally of personal data is that it's unlike a physical book or I don't know like this marker. When you exchange it, it's not so easy as like I just gave this to Bob, but it's more like we're exchanging rights to resource. And so this isn't unfamiliar. This is all precedented, but it's just helpful to note what's different and maybe to begin to understand a road that we can go down to find perhaps workable solutions. So for example, on a cargo vessel, like it could be tens of millions of dollars and very detailed little rights that parties would have and obligations with respect to that ginormous piece of property. There could be many companies and different consortia companies that have different contingent rights to it and rights in bankruptcy and rights for in payment, rights to space on the vessel and all kinds of stuff, governance rights for like bearing the costs and the rewards of repair and maintenance, on and on and on and on and on. It's incredibly complex. And so like exchanging rights to things is critical. And one of the first things you learn in law school is like ownership isn't really a single monolithic thing. It's really a bundle of rights. And so that's really a very poignant, critical insight with respect to this new asset type. So that's why I put it that way. Well, let's move on. Where's that sentence end? Oh, good. I'm so glad you're here, Christian. So we will catalyze and focus discussion around an applied identity anchor scenario. An anchor scenario, exploring the legal validity, admissibility, and enforceability of blockchain-based digital signatures to grant or revoke consent and authorization for electronic transactions. How shall we do that? Just with our words, because we don't have very much time and we're not really set up to do the demo. But good news is that if you go to the that URL there, you can actually see the whole demo in its glory and splendor with Christian and a colleague providing it to Digital Federal Credit Union. And you could get the code on GitHub. But instead, I'll just talk you through it very quickly, and then I'll ask Christian to keep me, just don't be shy about correcting me technically. Okay. Thanks. So what we have done, so did you notice that when I was talking about what's interesting about blockchain, I said that you get a wallet and an address, and then I started saying funny technical sounding things about key pairs and things like that. Remember that? So let's take another look at that. And why did I talk about that? It was sort of a different level of abstraction. It's very technical. The reason I wanted to foreshadow that is because there's a lot of good, cool things you can do with the cryptography and the hashes and the Merkle trees. And there's a lot of interesting sets of capabilities with blockchain. But one of them that struck me, like the first time I heard about it, as something that sounded like, wow, I want to explore that and it underlies this prototype, is that there's an automatic generation of a key pair, a cryptographic key pair, public-private keys. And when I learned about that, remember the Information Security Committee days in like the 90s, Michael Baum and ABA digital signature guidelines. When I learned about that, it was all about digital signatures and encryption. So PGP is a good example of a open source implementation of public-private key cryptography that would download some software and generate a key pair, and you can actually digitally sign email or documents. You can encrypt things, and the basic thing to know about it is anything encrypted with say the decrypted by the corresponding public key. So when you generate a key pair, you might publish or put in a directory or send widely your public key, and then if you were to say sign something with your private key, if people can verify it or basically with the corresponding public key, they know it must have come from you if you maintained it and like kept private your private key. And if you encrypt something and they decrypt it, people can decrypt it with, really what you would do is you would find someone's public key, and if you wanted to encrypt something so only they could see it, you would encrypt it with their public key, and you can know only they could decrypt it, because, one more time, anything encrypted, decrypted by the corresponding key. Like, that's the big news about public-private key cryptography. Well, here's the thing: is it's not easy. Key management is tough. The security challenges. The software is not easy to use. It's not widely integrated. We just still don't have them. We don't have flying cars, and we don't have public-private key cryptography that's usable yet. Or do we? Because if I encourage anyone who hasn't done it to download a Bitcoin or Ethereum wallet. And see how easy it is to get an address and, in fact, to conduct transactions. Well, there's a key pair buried down in there. And so it occurred to me and I think others that, well, could we just use that to let people literally sign things? A signature that actually would be with a key pair that's their own key pair, not one that's maybe locked into my Adobe software, locked into a vendor service, or part of like a server-to-server transaction with my employer or with a social network, but a key pair that's actually associated with the individual. That's cool. Turns out the answer is it's not so easy, but you can do it. And eventually, after much suffering, we did. And so when I say we, I really mean Christian and his team at MIT. And then we also had a slightly different approach with a Bitcoin library that some students did. So there are ways that you can identify and utilize within the wallet, or to extract, if you dare, the private key and then to use it in a different way. And so we did that. And you can see the demo, and then what we did, just to try it, we postulated a promissory note on a mortgage. So we imagined a mortgage origination scenario where there's a lot of things to sign at the closing, and we just imagined that the borrower and also the creditor and also the title insurer and also the for verification of employment and verification of insurance, that the parties basically could use keys that were associated with them for all the various signatures on that transaction and all the other transactions connected with that, and just to see how that would look. Turns out it looks beautiful, really beautiful, for lots of reasons. Among them is that actually you can and you can verify it properly. It's not buried in public in PKI certificates, which I don't know if anyone's ever tried to deal with those, but you can't. It's ASN1 coded, like, they're subject to these. It's so hard, like it doesn't even make any sense. This is piece of cake, and the way Christian's team did it, they actually made it way better. We put it in JSON, serialized, and some really nice stuff. So the reason I'm highlighting that is because what we decided to do in this room, actually, and other places here on the 4th floor on Tuesday nights, as part of Legal Hack Night, with legal hackers, is to test the boundaries of this method for digital signature with a key pair that is really owned and created and generated by the person signing themselves. So it's aligned to an individual who has identity and who owns their personal data, let us say, by going a little further than we did for like the credit union mortgage origination demo. And instead we postulated, okay, what if they signed a bill of sale for a used car of like a little bit more than the threshold for small claims court. So I cannot remember what that is, like $10,000 or whatever it is. And anyway, so we postulated that, and then we postulated something went terribly wrong. And like either like, I got the car, but you didn't get the money, or like I gave you money, I didn't get the car, something like that. Some version of the deal tanked. And the reason we did that was to try to kind of control everything else should be as normal as possible, like a retail typical transaction, like Suffolk County Superior Court, the sort of thing that you see all the time with like settled rules of procedure and evidence, settled contract law, settled as much as we can settle, and then just change one little thing. What if we used a digital signature that was blockchain based from a key pair that was actually associated with those individuals? Well, what we found is that number one, as we tracked through the rules of evidence for admissibility and some other rules, it looked like a lot of what was required to prove authenticity of the data and that it hadn't changed since a certain time, to do attribution under Uniform Electronic Transactions Act and things like that, actually look like a really good fit for the capabilities of the technology, ways to actually start to collapse and reduce and steps that otherwise you need to get like an expert witness to testify about, how business records in the business and chain of custody and to prove log, because we have this publicly verifiable distributed ledger. It also can serve as like a date and time stamping service, and can show integrity of the data, and can be, as I said, attributed or tied to individuals from their key pair. Has a lot going for it. The other thing we learned when we started, I thought that we'd be done with this by now, but when it came time to pretend that we're entering into evidence, we had some litigators, Christian and I and others, doing witness examination to lay the foundation for admissibility into evidence. And then we ask questions like, okay, and so can you explain, for the judge really, like what is public-private key cryptography? Like what is the blockchain? What is just the basics of it? And then like, oh man, it turns out that we need to now work on how to simplify it and describe it in understandable ways. But so I'd say we're going to continue doing that. So this little anchor scenario of using just the signature component is part of probably another month or two of work, and then it'll culminate in like a partial mock trial where we'll go through the ceremony of entering into evidence and have some objections, kind of wrap it up and do a blog post or something. But I believe what we can say right now is that this is a great example, one type of capability that blockchain makes available that can be utilized as a tool and as a mechanism by which people can express ownership of something. Like you could sign like a title digitally, by which you can express a grant or of authorization or rights to maybe access or borrow something with a digital signature, and by which we can have cryptographic publicly verifiable evidence of when authorization was granted, when it was revoked, and the data hasn't changed. This, I'm just gonna throw out there for your consideration and discussion, could be the sort of things that we would need that at wide scale, which and outside of a single like vendor solution or a single siloed kind of solution that we would need in order to successfully transition to this new era, this digital era for our property and identity. So, yay. Let's go on. What are the key issues, options, and opportunities? Hear that, prospectors? Opportunities for, I hope I said for, next. Where, damn it, I lost my place. Opportunities for innovative FinTech products, services, and markets arising from this new digital asset class of identity and personal data and the tools around it. And I'm not going to opine on that because actually that's my question for you all as a launching point at 6:39 into the discussion period. So just for the record, and we are recording this in 2 places. I was told to start at 6:10 and that we can go 10 minutes late. So I believe that we're at the 30-minute mark and we're doing great. And so with that, let me just ask, do I need to turn off the recording now for the discussion, or does anyone want me to turn it off? I invite anybody that wants me to turn this off. It's just, oh, I guess you guys are in, sorry, but it's just kind of facing this way. Just tell me in advance. And if you don't say your name if you don't want that in there, or say your name if you want to get all the credit for your amazing contribution or question.
You guys tell your wife you were going golfing.
It's just a type of sport. So with that, thank you for your attention. And let's launch into the discussion. And then actually we have a ticket, and then I think you're next. And so first it's Andre, and you had an insight about why the word resource is so good.
Yes, it's resourcing, so it's a source of something, which in my overview
cool.
does not have a value inherently. It gets value as it's being used. So as you resource things, it gets value. In fact, the value of it changes depending on how we use it and when.
That's really insightful. I'm just going to write that down. And English is not your first language, I take it?
It's Hungarian.
Yeah, so this is really awesome. So S-O-U-R-C-E, which kind of gets us into some of the land use and some of the broader, more almost like infrastructure or like environmental, or systemic dimensions of this concept of resource. Thank you. And I think you wanted to launch us into discussion land. Hit it.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it from like a bank compliance officer perspective. Right? So what if a person? I'm not talking about the person who's all in and using blockchain for all these transactions. It's easy to verify that person. The French case, where it's the first-time user. How does the bank compliance manager know? Like, what if that user signs a bunch of things and it says that wasn't done? So that's one question.
Yep.
And then what stops another person from opening multiple accounts and just forgetting which ones they, just error, forgetting which ones they sign, which ones they don't. Just a broad opening salvo.
Great. So I think the point of inquiry was as we look at the identity aspect of blockchain and think about it in a financial services context. Wait a minute, but what about the extra time? The flying cars. 6:10.
Yeah, so you have a half hour.
Oh, darn it. Oh, thanks. Okay, yeah, we're not doing good. Or we're doing so good that it's all over, I suppose. Let me just, so the question was, what do you do? In a sense, I'd say, like, how good of, what are the issues for identity, and what happens if someone repudiates their signature, and what happens if they have multiple identities, maybe for money laundering or who knows what, terrorism or something nasty, right? Anybody?
So part of it is that, one of the things we looked into, in the early parts of this is that your identity has to be verified, right? One way to think about it, so the sovereign identity, right?
Yeah.
Identity you totally control, right? And nobody has to attest that it's really you, right? And then there's identity that has to be verified, right? Whether it's government, whatever it is, right? We're not in that world yet where the DMV would digitally sign your ID to say it's really you, right? But that world is coming, right? Or passport office does the same thing, right? That says, oh yeah, that's really Al Willis, right?
Yeah.
Eventually we'll be there, right? Now it's just a matter of, and part of the thing about identity, people always have multiple identities, right? There's you at work, there's you at home, there's you in your club, there's you in your other situations, right? Part of it is a UI UX thing in terms of how easy, it's still one wallet, right? But it's about how easy can I switch between different IDs when I need to. When you're doing your golfing gamer thing online or whatever, that's a different ID.
Just a quick pause to make sure you're tracking. I think, and then you, but I think you're actually, I think everything you said covers most of what, is it Damon said. But then I think when you said, what if you had multiple and you forgot, that also sort of covers what if you actually had multiple different wallets and completely like an air gap between them is part of the question as well.
Sure, and I think part of it, even now, so I'm a web developer among other things, right? So it is even a way now using different structures on the web to say, this ID is the same as this ID, right?
Yep.
There's a way to say, this person, this is Twitter, this Facebook, this Instagram, right? So that you can have multiple IDs that when Google does the search, it goes, okay, I know that all these IDs are related to this one person, right?
So could I, Andy, ask for, what are they saying in the Senate, like defer?
Point of order?
Defer, like, would you like pause for 1 sec? Because I want to ask Christian, what is the method that you're currently exploring technically to connect, say, like a key pair, like a blockchain address, for example, with a person, to say, like a singular role, such as like a person at a bank that has been undergone, your customer and other things. You had some ideas. What were they?
So we're working on the idea of attestation exchange networks, where you as a person could have.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. We're working on the idea of attestations and attestation exchange networks, where you can have third parties give cryptographically verifiable assertions about you. So one of those could be, for example, a bank or a financial institution who's done know your customer type activities to say, this is really this person's public key. We'll verify this. And they may not even disclose your identity. They may just say, we'll vouch for this public key that we know who this is. And maybe there's some kind of legal recourse where if you get into a lawsuit, then they're obligated to disclose your identity, but otherwise it's not. And other things like privacy-preserving background checks, where you could have maybe the clerk's office issue an attestation saying, this person really does not have any felony convictions, versus giving away their whole criminal history, which could be extensive in some cases.
Right, but all misdemeanors.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christian. So Andy, and then I think we'll have to wrap.
All right, well, I just wanted to say that this idea that you're not going to know when the person is the same person or who it is sort of a point in time. It's sort of a fantasy that we have, but we're going to have to give up, because pretty soon computers are going to know exactly who you are. And many of the banks I know, before they come into what we call authentic ID, that will actually, when they put your identity into the global wallet, take a picture of your driver's license or something, and they check that for duplicates. And there's lots of ways for checking for duplicates. So actually, we're moving not eventually, but very, very rapidly into a situation where you're not going to be able to back out of your identity.
So everybody that's thinking about this, just know that there's good ideas, and that we're in a place where there's money on the table, there's need, there's pain, And so there's opportunity for prospectors, and there's also challenges. And so there you go with a quick overview. Those of you who want to learn and talk more, we're doing Future Law class for the first time at MIT. You can sign up and audit if you like. We have a 100-person room that's not very filled. Right now at the Media Lab on Tuesdays, you sign up at MIT.edu/law. Thank you very much. See you online.